Cool, thank you. Yeah, so welcome everybody. Really, really great that you've joined us for what is our first masterclass, our first members only from SVI. Deep dive into principles and key issues. Feel free to put your camera on if you wish. I know bandwidth's not always the easiest, or feel free to hide. And what time of day is it? Have your breakfast if it's still that time of day whilst we're talking. It is just a 60-minute session today. And we'll focus on a particular principle. So today, as it says, is maybe not lucky, but certainly principle number 8. This is a bit of a learning journey for us as well. So genuinely do let us know how we can make these better. I think it's fair to say we will look to improve things as we go. We already have our next session scheduled. I'll give you the date at the very end, but we're starting with principle 8 and then going around the loop. So we'll go back to principle number 1. But given that we have this new principle, we thought it was quite timely to have a conversation about it. And hopefully you'll see this featuring in the conversations at the conference. I'm going to make a cheap plug. Hope you've all registered for the conference. About 14 days left, I believe. So October 20th, October 21st. And I see you all virtually in Bangkok. So today we'll talk about this principle to be responsive. There's a cheesy grin on my face because it's taken us quite a while to get this principle, and I genuinely remember about 3 Christmas holidays ago doing what all good social value geeks do, and that's write a proposal for an 8th principle. It's not all down to me, so if it's not to your liking, don't just blame me. There were a number of people who certainly wanted to see this across the membership, but it has been an ongoing conversation about what it means. We're still in the throes of that. It is still at draft stage. That's a bit of a disclaimer. So the standards, the documentation is not yet fully published, but the aim is certainly to have that by the end of this year. So still lots of conversations happening about what it means, also the implications in terms of training, in terms of assurance and accreditation services. And as we say, absolutely no decisions have been taken. And of course, that will happen fully engaged with all networks, all membership, as everything is that we do. So what does this mean in practice? I think that's the question we should be asking, and it's the question I ask to you. So we'll try to make this interactive. There'll be a bit of a breakout session later. My first attempt at interactivity is to ask you to go to menti.com, please. If you've not been there before, it's a really cool, free to use website. Becca has just dropped the code in. So if you go to menti.com, drop that code in, there is a question there. It's a word cloud. And it basically says, drop your key phrases in, drop your words in. What does to be responsive mean to you? And let's see what our thoughts are collectively before we start giving our definitions as they are in draft form. So I'll go to Menti myself in a moment. Shout at me if there are any problems. Probably won't be able to resolve. But Becca might. I like that. That's the first thing. Oh, she's back. So I'll talk to this when a bit more comes in. But if you're not familiar with the word cloud, essentially the more frequently a word appears or phrase, the more prominent it is. But yeah, let's see what we think.
It's being recorded.
What is it?
This is where you'll start to see my head rotating. It doesn't go all the way, but take action, address problems, respond to stakeholders, do something. I like that. I think that should have perhaps been the name of the principle. It was going to be something like be responsive, take action, or do something. Making decisions, being proactive, reflective, change, using data, action, adapt. You can see the words in front of you. I have this tendency to sort of try and read all of them out. We'll take a PDF of this and see if we can do anything with it as well. Becca, share it amongst the membership. but I think we're on very similar page. What does it mean to be responsive? I love that take action remains at the center. I'm sure as soon as I say that, it will disappear. But it is very much about, being evidence-led, listening to the data, being guided by those insights from our stakeholders. We know the centrality, the prominence of principle number 1 to involve stakeholders. So yeah, don't ignore the evidence. You can keep responding to this, of course, but let's go back to the slides, because we have our interpretation here of to be responsive, and also we've got a working definition of what to be responsive means from this draft document. Just bear with me as I clunkily move from one platform to another. So from our perspective, this is a very collective hour, I want us to ask this question, not just, I guess, to take action, but how can we take action, use that central phrase that we had, how can we take action so that the decisions we take and the accounting and the reporting for social value that we do achieves optimal social value as fast as possible. Now, hopefully you're now asking the question of, well, what does optimal social value mean? And this is what it means to us. And again, this is, I really hesitate sometimes saying this is what it means to us, because us is everybody on this call. These are still in draft, as I say, they're still being edited by, it's the co-chair of the methodology subcommittee. And of course, the document went out to all members, so there's been a real opportunity to engage. So to be responsive means to create optimal social value. Optimal social value means, as it says in front of us, meeting or creating value to meet stakeholder needs as quickly, as far and as fast as possible. So it's not just about meeting things such as SDGs and other universally agreed goals. I think there's a limit if we were to just say it's just about SDGs, because the stakeholder needs, the stakeholder value might go beyond that, of course. So it's really important that we say it's about optimizing, create as much as possible in line with those internationally agreed goals, and it's really important, and stakeholder needs. In fact, stakeholder needs first and the SDGs and similar. So what you might see is a slight change in phraseology. You don't see the word maximize at the moment. We're sort of moving slowly, still debating towards a position where we use that phrase of optimizing social value rather than maximizing social value. Being really, really honest, really transparent, this is still a conversation that is occurring within the methodology subcommittee, and that will feed up to the board before any final decisions are taken. Maximizing, optimizing, there's a whole 60 minutes of debating definitions in there, but I promise you that we won't do that today. So to optimize social value is to use your resources as much as possible to make as much value as possible for your stakeholders. Something I think you would say we've all been aiming to do anyway. I think it's fair to say that, be responsive, and this was the debate really, before I talk to this slide, did we need, or do we need, a principle that says to be responsive? I was firmly, my view was firmly in the camp of yes. I want us to be really explicit about what is at the heart of social value and impact management, whereas other people were of the mind, well, actually, it's implicit in what we're doing anyway. So it wasn't as seen by some as such an urgent requirement. So, I think what we all share is a belief that we were all working towards this anyway, working towards making better decisions that increase and work towards optimizing social value for stakeholders. What the draft document goes into in a bit more detail are the types of decisions that we all take. And again, there is an element of talking common sense and what we already know here, but I think it is really important that we're explicit in that need to be explicit about what being responsive means. It's about making different types of decisions, from strategic, from tactical, operational, and then the implications of that, the type of data that is required, that level of precision. Anybody who knows me knows I'm about to say we need enough precision for the decision. There are also implications in things such as the level of independent third-party assurance and the frequency in which we make those decisions, as well as the cost or consequences if we get the decision wrong. So overlaying this, Jada, you've heard me say this at least 1,000 times, is of course enough precision for the decision. There's a moment here of pausing. I feel like this is becoming a bit too much of me talking. So a pause, a reflection. Any questions, challenges? We can't get rid of the principle if that's your challenge. It's here to stay. But any thoughts, reflections, queries to where we're up to at the moment? Carl, you're unmuted. You're going to say something.
I was thinking about it, Adam. I was thinking about saying something. There was something just stirred a thought with me a while ago when you were talking about optimizing social value means meeting stakeholder needs. I was just reflecting on a lot of the work we do with charities. It assumes that stakeholders have gone through a process of understanding what needs are. And I wondered, did you debate whether that's slightly counterintuitive to open questioning about what changes for you and that whole area of defining need and how you think that works in terms of the definition of optimizing social value? That was just my thought process that I was thinking through when I unmuted there.
Well, I'm glad you unmuted. Well, actually, part of me now is regretting it. No, it is, I think it's an important question. I was doing a training session in anecdote time. I was doing a session this morning, and I said to the people in the room, you know, the reason I really, you know, big advocate for the principles is that they always get me out of trouble whenever a question's asked. So I've got to turn to the principles now, haven't I, and go, how do they get me out of trouble here? And I still believe they do, because I think what we should all see is, of course, that, you know, social value, and if we use SROI, the method of SROI, fine, is stakeholder informed rather than stakeholder led exclusively. So I hear what you're saying. You know, there are those instances, and I think they're rarer than, or less frequent than some people would perhaps think. I think often when people come to this, they go, oh, stakeholders can't tell you information about their own lives. I know, Carl, you don't take that stance, of course, but yeah, there are definitely times when perhaps other sources of evidence, other stakeholders, you know, professionals in people's lives, family members, as well as other sources of evidence that include, you know, societal norms, can and should shape what is included in a social account. So materiality, so I've gone to my involved stakeholders, I'm now going to materiality as the principle. You know, it is what is relevant to stakeholders, to society, and or to organizational objectives. So I guess what we're saying within that definition is, you know, this, yeah, I see what you're saying. We're almost saying that stakeholder maximize, slip of the tongue, optimize the value for stakeholders according to their needs, but implicit within that, recognizing that their needs may not be fully recognized by the stakeholder, I guess. And that's where the societal norms and others would come in to give us that broader view of what are material impacts. So thanks to principle, when we include what is material, I think answers that one. But you're right about the definition. I think, you know, definitions are always dangerous, aren't they? You know, this is it, but we've always got to unpick them a little bit. Cheers.
I think that's really good advice around taking the bits from the range of principles rather than getting too focused on a definition of one. But this is great stuff, Adam. I mean, the whole idea of a new principle and, you know, being responsive. I'll not take up too much time, but there was another kind of vision went through my mind where we're all working hard and we push this big lump up the hill and we're about to push it over on the other side, you know, but we collapse with exhaustion around the measurement of the stuff and don't do the responsive bit when you've completed that. So I'm really up for the debate and discussion around that. I think it's a great principle and a great initiative. So I'm totally up for it.
Cool. Thank you, Carl. No, I agree completely. I think we all, I'm sure many of us are having conversations all of the time that go, it's about accounting, it's not about reporting, it's about doing something. Please do something with this. This is not an annual exercise, end of funding cycle exercise. So that's why I'm, you know, fully behind this, in so much as it just strongly encourages, forces us to do it. Again, we don't, we've the implications for things like report assurance have certainly not been thought through. But it is going to have to really encourage us to just, when we write a report, recommendations, we do it anyway, recommendations for improvement, but it's going to encourage us, I think, to do it that much more. So yeah, I'm fully with you, Carl. We couldn't take one principle on its own. This is really the culmination of all other 7 principles. We can't respond if we haven't done everything else, because the risk is just simply too great. Let's turn it over to you. So whether we're on board or not, hopefully we're thinking about some of the challenges around this. And I do think this is probably, in practice, going to be the most challenging principle to enact. Yeah, we can involve stakeholders. Yeah, we can understand outcomes. We can tie ourselves in knots measuring all day long. But actually for the organizations we work for or run, how do we build this principle in? And for those organizations you're supporting, if you've got clients, what is needed to be responsive, to inform things, those operational, tactical, and strategic changes. And again, different times, different levels of data quality, different levels of assurance that are required. So we've got 35 people in the room. So Becca, I'm guessing we're going to go into around 7 breakout rooms or so with 5 people in. We've got a decent time for conversation, 10 minutes, we're bang on schedule. So we'll go have small breakout rooms rather for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and discuss. So there will be challenges, and I think it's fair to highlight the challenges, but let's also think about solutions as well. We can't just focus on the easy things, the challenges. Let's focus on some of the more challenging things, the solutions. So Becca, if you're happy to open the rooms, you're going in randomly. What is needed in practice to support your organization or the organizations you work with to be responsive? Not an easy question. The rooms are open. Just pause a second there. Welcome back, everybody. I'm sure that wasn't enough for any group, and you were all mid-sentence. It's something absolutely profound. I don't know who was in which group, so I'm just going to ask for a willing volunteer to start the conversation off. What do we need? What are some of the solutions to make our organizations and those we work with embed this idea to be responsive? I know so many of you so well. I'm going to point at somebody soon.
I also have a list of who is in each room, so we can pick on individual rooms.
Fantastic. This is terrible abuse of power, isn't it? Pick somebody from group 1 then.
Oh, group 1 was my group. So Joe, I'm going to pick on you. Either Joes that were in my room, actually.
I think Joe Lee would do a good job.
Okay,
good on you, Joe.
I love it when people are volunteered. It's just brilliant.
So we talked about quite a few things, actually. I think we talked about like organisationally how we use that feedback loop, I guess, not just from stakeholders, but how that translates into other teams that might be impacted by things that are being discussed and how they could kind of implement some of the feedback and actually shortening that feedback loop so it can kind of, it doesn't, the message or the meaning doesn't get lost because it's too diluted or it slows things down. And then we also kind of talked about how governance structures need to kind of enable this, particularly in larger public sector organisations, where things can be slow or social value kind of goes in like the too difficult box, that when quick decisions need to be made or decisions need to be made, it's not always embedded within those governance structures. And we also talked about having a unifying vision and like as a catalyst or a way to kind of bring people together. and actually what that catalyst needs to be. So in a pandemic, we talked about, obviously everyone was able to be responsive and really quickly be responsive because there was kind of no other option. Like everyone just had to work together and get on with it. And it's sometimes maybe being that organisation that brings everybody together to make things happen. And then we also had a little bit of a discussion on the time, like how you respond in a timely way. And that doesn't necessarily mean quickly responding, it means responding in the right way. And that takes as long as it takes, and it might take a little bit longer, and there's some sort of acknowledgement around that.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think, some really key points there. And I think, just the pandemic, it shows how we can be responsive quickly in the right way, and I think whenever now, people say, oh, we can't change as much as we need, we just all have the go-to example that goes, that we did, we can, when we need to or when we want to. So we've sort of eradicated the number of our excuses. That way. Cool, Joe. Thank you. Lovely to see you as well, of course. Group 2, was there anything left? We won't necessarily go through all groups. People, feel free to shout out if you've got something great to say. But Becca's going to point at somebody in group 2 otherwise.
Yeah, Megan, I'm going to point at you.
Evil laugh.
Our group was quite quiet. Yeah, I guess I'll just echo basically what's been said so far, especially about the governance structures and needing to really lead from and have it embedded from leadership to set a real culture for making something out of the impact reports that we create, and doing meaningful research and committing to embed the practice that we are told by our stakeholders and the people that we engage with is important. So yeah, for us, it's really about organizational mentality and setting that from leadership.
Thank you. Cheers, Megan. Anybody want to volunteer themselves? I feel like we're being a bit mean.
Well, I'll go.
Cheers, right?
Yeah, I mean, within our group, we've sort of established we're from different sort of sectors and contributing in different ways. I mean, within my particular part of the world, I'm still on that journey of I like Carl's analogy earlier, pushing uphill, and you get to the top, and then, but we need to be more optimistic than that. And I think to achieve a full cultural adoption, and to achieve that, I think in some ways, certainly in the world that I operate within, we need some more governance from government level to make more imposition, to ensure that people are open and transparent and willing, and immersing the business, or certainly in my world, immersing the business culturally into what we're all aspiring to deliver. I mean, that's my world, and certainly the group I was sharing it with, we all concurred that in principle they were the sort of higher level statements, words, intentions that we believe we need to get the principle off the ground, keep it moving.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ross. Yeah, for policy change, I think absolutely. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we can't, to be responsive, we can't afford to wait for policy change. But I think to get the mass, as you say, full adoption, complete immersion across the board, there will be those that need to be, strongly encouraged. I think there's a lot of, being generous. There's lots of pioneers on this call. There's lots of not so pioneering organisations not on this call, who are less aware of the need or less willing, able, whatever it may be, to do so. The group I was in, I won't point a finger at anybody in that group, but there's some very articulate people, if anybody would like to take the baton. Before I say Joe Nicholson.
Oh, Rush. I was just, you see the word articulate, so I was just waiting thinking, oh, he's not talking about me. We actually had a discussion much the same as what everybody else said. I think one of the key points that I think Hugo made really well was that it's strange that it's Principle 8 where it potentially could be Principle 1, where a lot of consultants potentially could say that the effort that we go to SRO reports, if we don't keep them alive and actually do the change that we need, that is recommended, are we really optimizing the social value for our stakeholders? So I think echoing what everyone else said, but that was just a good little point that that Hugo brought up. And also around the donor grantee, the building trust around that, around understanding. I think Irina mentioned that there's in Russia, they have the things around the donor grantee, understanding really what the organization may think one thing, but actually they have an idea about another reason. So bringing them up to speed to get on aligning the thinking as well. If I missed anything, group.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I think, that what came out of that group so clearly, the power that is inherent within decision making. And to be responsive might mean challenging some of those assumptions, those value judgments, that inherent power. It's one of the 4 Ps that social value movement has, banged a drum about for over 10 years. We've got principles, we recognize the power imbalances, we talk about practice, and of course, people. So power, I think, is the big challenge for me, getting over that. Sometimes saying to people, your value judgment wasn't as good as it could be. In fact, sometimes it was even wrong. We talk about making strategic changes. Well, that might be saying to a policymaker, a donor, funder, decision maker in an organization, actually, we're not doing the right thing fundamentally. We should be shifting our whole strategic focus. Again, of course, to make that sort of decision, high level of accuracy, external scrutiny, and so on. So yeah, some really key words coming out of this: keeping it alive, making it meaningful, leadership, governance, unifying visions, delegation across teams. Is there anything from the remaining groups that we've not touched upon? I think we've got a lot. Sorry, the floor is yours.
Yeah, for our group, I don't know what group number we are in, but I am with Carl and Natasha and one more. For us, what's important is like when we identify, for example, our outcomes and impact as high, medium, and low level impact. The organization need to decide on how can we implement or how can we do the high performing projects or components of projects more efficiently at low cost, and how can we decisions on things that we need to stop if the outcome is low level outcome. And also in being responsive, we need to know, I know we know the need of our stakeholders, but beyond that, we should link the outcomes or the performance of the projects or program and link it to the goals. What are the situations in the local area? So what really are needed by the people in general, and are we contributing to the national goals, or are we contributing to a broader civil society goals, or the goals of the international, the SDG. And for us also for example, me, I came from corporate foundation. So we are also keen on looking at and linking the measurement that we do to some standards like the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance. And we also look at some indicators that are it's more technical, but we're going to that, the GRI and all of those indicators that need to be harmonized with the SROI that we do, so that we can be more responsive on the group of organizations that are around us. That's it. And I think also it's very important that Principle 8 to be linked to embedding and the decisions to be made by organizations based on the findings. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe Carl and Natasha can add something more to the discussion.
No, that was brilliant. I think you covered it really good. Did a great job.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Because I think what you've
Thanks.
highlighted for us there is we have the challenge of changing an organization's mindset, in shorthand with a lot of what we heard around culture, leadership, and so on. But then there's an even bigger picture, which is, okay, the organization's doing more, but is it doing more? Is it doing enough within that sort of macro environment? And it's such a challenge, isn't it? If we're talking about, one enterprise, how can they truly contribute to things such as the SDGs? And it's good teamwork, guys, because you've helped me segment into a new development which you may or may not be familiar with, which is definitely linked to what we're talking about now. So this is the SDG impact standard. So there are 3 standards, one for enterprise, one for equity investment, one for bond markets. What all 3 of them do is share the 4 common pillars. You can see those in that illustration in front of you. So everything you spoke about, I would say, is there. You wanted good governance, leadership, that culture, strategy that we're going to need. People absolutely mentioned about transparency. And I wonder whether we collectively on this call, we sort of take it for granted that we have the more technical pieces in place, because, the management approaches, I really love an alliteration, and Louis, you're on the call, you'll know these, but we need the structures, certainly, but we need the systems as well, and we need the skills in place. And I think, all of those things around challenging power and to be responsive, we need the data collection, we need the data analysis, we need the comparison of performance to expectations, to thresholds, and to targets. So SVI are working in partnership with SDG Impact. We're currently providing training to trainers. That's one of the things we do a lot of, training of trainers who will support organizations to embed the SDG impact standard. This sings so closely to the principles of social value and the idea of optimizing social value. If you read this document, and it is a good document, it's not overly long or overly technical, it says something along the lines of, this should be aligned with high-level principles such as the SVI, or social value principles. So they do work hand in hand. And the management approach in particular is about having those systems in place, having things like a stakeholder engagement policy, getting data, not extracting, but somebody used the word meaningful. I think it was Megan. I couldn't agree more. It's all got to be meaningful stakeholder engagement. And meaningful means to me, we are responsive. And if we're not responsive, then we're probably not being as accountable as we should be. So have a look at this standard. It really does align with a lot of what we're thinking. And if anybody is not aware at the moment, Jeremy Nichols, I'm sure you all know Jeremy Nichols, is now employed by SDG Impact. And Jeremy is working with others to develop the assurance seal for the SDG Impact standard. So really, really positive news. 2022 will be the year of assurance, clearly. Carl, you started this off with us a few years ago. 2022, my friend, is the year of assurance. So do you want to make claims about SDGs and move away from, as many do, sort of, picking their favorite colors? This is, how to embed the ideas we're all talking about. It's a really clear process, a really good journey. But let's remind ourselves, let's not terrify ourselves. I love that phrase, enough precision for the decision. It's one of my favorites. Pretty much going to be my next tattoo, I think. But the data we need just has to be good enough. Let's remind ourselves we're not searching for objective truth and perfection. And we've used this phrase so often, enough precision for the decision. It's in some of our documentation, but we should really unpick what that means. And again, the draft standard is really clear on what it means precision and to support decision making and levels of rigor. Rigor is made up of being levels of completeness and levels of accuracy. You can see what it says in front of you, but completeness is, have you included all material impacts? The accuracy piece, and we would always argue, we really do need to be complete. To go for level 3 report assurance, simply has to be complete. That's really not that variable. What is more variable is the level of accuracy. So enough precision, really should say enough accuracy for the decision, but it just doesn't roll off the tongue so much. That's where we can be variable about sample sizes, methods applied, and so on. I'm sure stuff that we know really well. But what the SDG impact standard and the principles allow us to do is really support our clients, support our own organizations on this journey to being better able to deliver sustainable value, better able to deliver optimal value, better able essentially to deliver the needs of stakeholders. But people have mentioned one thing, and I think we really should pull this out. Somebody in our group spoke about risk, of the group I was certainly in. And the opposite side of optimizing social value is risk. And that's in my mind now how if I'm forced to say, summarize what impact management means. On one side, it's optimizing social value. On the other side of the same coin, it's impact risk, the risk that we don't optimize value. So something that's really coming out is a bit of the next hot topic, I would say, is impact risk. It's been part of the 5 dimensions of impact for a number of years. But again, the standard really talks about managing risk, mitigating risk, so that the decisions we take, we are more confident that they do provide enough precision. So risk is dependent on a few factors. You can see them in front of you. But essentially, we've got to ask ourselves the question, is the level of risk acceptable? Is it, if we could create high levels of return, impact return, or the risk is we create no return or negative return, are we willing to accept that level of risk? But there's an important question within this. When I say, are we willing to accept this level of risk? The question to Penny is, who experiences the risk if we make the wrong or a suboptimal decision?
That was to me.
It was, sorry, Penny, I just scrolled down, saw you.
I was like, I'm sure he said my name. Well, of course, who experiences the risk, that's going to be our stakeholders.
Yeah.
So the people that, we are affecting through our activities.
Yeah. So how do we understand what is an acceptable level of risk? I'll spread the questions and I'll go to Sandra. Sandra, nice to see you again. When it comes to financial investments or financial impacts, we talk about the risk appetite of investors. What about trying to understand the risk appetite of our stakeholders? Any thoughts on how we might go about that, how we could go about it? How do we do this?
I mean, a lot of the time the stakeholders are people who are already disenfranchised, right? So they don't have as many choices maybe as an investor or funder. So I think and I think we all come across that in our work if we're doing consultation with those, those client groups. That they're worried about what they're even going to say. We have to try and, that because they worry that, am I going to lose a service if I'm negative, if I don't say the right thing about all that sort of stuff. So I think it can be done, but I think it has to be done in a really kind of sensitive way that where you're actually going to get the information that you need, and I wonder actually, and sometimes whether this might be one of the cases where actually you might ask somebody else, where you might pose as many questions directly to the people themselves, but also get the be informed by other stakeholders as well. I think it really depends on who they are and what is it that we're asking them. But yes, I think it ought to be done. I really like this idea of impact risk. I hadn't really thought about it. So that's all I have to say about it at the moment.
Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? We are definitely at a stage where, and this is what I like about this world that we're inhibiting in this impact world, is, you know, blink and you miss something. You know, I start to think, oh, I've got my head around all these ideas, and then, oh, impact risk appetite of stakeholders affected. And I think that's where we're now at collectively, is going, I think we accept that if the stakeholder is likely to, well, they will experience the risk. We need to understand their risk appetite. And now we're at a point of asking the question of how do we go about that? And I've been, you know, just those nights you do as you start to think, well, you offer people options, you know, if it's a high return to a low return, how willing would you be to accept one of those as a trade-off? If it was a medium return to a negative return, what would your appetite be? So what I would say is at the moment, I would turn obviously to the standard, but also to impact management project, and a bit of highlight that project will soon become the impact management platform as the project is coming to its natural end. So impact management platform will be co-hosted by some of the partners within there. And they have some really useful stuff on risk. And they have a pretty traditional risk matrix, you know, the severity of the risk if it materializes against the likelihood that it does. And then somehow what we've got to try and do is map across that the risk appetite of those stakeholders affected. So that's, I'm not coming today with answers on this one. I'm leaving it as rhetorical questions on how we go about better understanding the risk appetite of those stakeholders affected. And for those of you involved in methodology subcommittee, this is probably where we'll be going. For those of you not involved but want to be, shout out, let us know. We're always looking for new insights from people. So it is out soon. We will be updating. We are currently updating all existing standards. All the standards have to now at least reference. We have 8. There will be some implications for training, for assurance and accreditation. As I say, no, no discussions have even started to that end. And of course, they won't happen without the full and active involvement of all committees and members and networks and so forth. What I will leave us with is just a couple of statements and a rhetorical question. I think it's always been here. I think we're just making explicit what has been implicit. It is fundamentally required. And my question to you, and I don't expect any answers today, is what are we going to do? We'll say next week, what are we going to do on Monday within our organizations that could help us be more responsive to our stakeholder needs, to societal needs, to those universal global goals? Yeah, have a think about it. Please join in the conversation, help us shape the debate, help us shape the development of the methods, the standards, and so forth. We will hopefully by the end of this year, if not creeping into the beginning of next, for the very first time, have standards for each of the, what are now 8 principles of social value. We have another masterclass before the end of the year, coming on the 17th of November. A bit more detail will come, but it's certainly going to be on involving stakeholders. I'm sure I speak for Becca when I say, let us know how you want these sessions to be shaped. If it's not interactive enough, let us know. We think we might have, you know, sort of showcases as well, where we're able to talk about case studies. It won't always be me talking. It will certainly be, I think Ben will deliver the next session, and also look to involve members in these conversations as well. So thank you very much indeed. Genuine pleasure to have a conversation with people. We started on such a friendly term. I was saying to Becca while we were going to the break rooms, I was in such a sort of friendly, informal mood. I didn't even introduce myself. So I think you've probably heard my name is Adam by now, if you didn't know me. Mission there at the beginning. But once again, everybody, thank you for your time. You know how valuable it is. Have a great weekend when you get there. Stay safe, but have some fun along the way as well. See you all very soon, I hope. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye.